Yeah, I'm ready.
Alrighty, we stand firm affirmation of the resolution. The United States federal government should nationalize the U.S. fossil fuel industry. U.S. federal government is pretty straightforward definition. Federal government inside the United States. Nationalize as turn the U.S. Fossil fuel industry into a state-run industry. And the U.S. fossil fuel industry is just gas and oil companies in the United States, inside of the United States, which produce fossil fuels. Now, our plan is basically to have the United States federal government nationalize fossil fuel industries within the United States through normal means. And just a quick observation is that a lot of the references that we're going to be drawing is through PEMEX, which is a very successful, and our weighing mechanism is net benefits, cost-benefit analysis in this round. And one observation is that a lot of our examples are going to come from PEMEX, which is a very successful state-run industry of nationalization of the fossil fuel industry in Mexico. So our first contention is basically the idea of fracking and less environmental costs. So we define fracking as the fracturing of rock by a pressurized liquid. It's basically drilling on land to get these short shales of oil. So basically private companies have more incentive to basically make profit than solve for external costs. And these external costs basically mean that the environment is an external cost. The quality of life in these areas where people are drilling is an external cost, and because oftentimes it costs more money for these regulations, and ultimately these private companies have a larger responsibility for profits for their shareholders, they won't be looking out for these external costs. So you see that a lot of the problems associated with fracking is because that companies are privatizing these profits, and as a result, you see that because of inefficient fracking, you have these earthquakes, you have these landslides, it's hurting the environment because of the sloppy drilling that's going on. There's a lot of runoff pollution that's hurting the ecosystems in these towns where fracking is occurring. It's also seeping into the drinking water and causing lots of long-term diseases as well as short-term diseases in the populations. And furthermore, once again, you have chemicals running into the water supply and the groundwater. So you have a poor quality of life for people because they're getting these diseases from these chemicals. You're significantly hurting the environment in an unnecessary way, which further links into extinction and global warming. So basically how we solve for this is by nationalizing it, because the federal government does not have such a large basically responsibility to shareholders to maximize profits, because they actually care about external costs, because instead of profit being their number one goal, it's generally just voter approval. You'll see that in Mexico, people will turn to, as a result, you'll solve for these environmental harms, you'll solve for the quality of life. Yeah, sure.
Under subsidized fracking, will there still be at least a little bit of environmental harms?
Not subsidized.
This isn't subsidized, we're nationalized.
I mean, like under nationalized fracking.
If you guys can prove it. So our second contention is the idea that job quality. So once again, it's better to have a federal job because once again, you have a lot of federal benefits. And furthermore, once again, these companies are so fixated on maximizing profits and returns for their shareholders, they're going to find ways to basically not pay for safety regulations. So you see that a lot of these jobs in the fracking industry are very prone to injury, or very prone to death. But once again, the federal government has an overwhelming incentive to keep workers happy, as opposed to pay shareholders higher dividends. So because it needs voter approval to continue running these programs and to continue getting elected. So you'll see that there's more safety regulations, there's a higher quality of life for workers, you're less likely to get laid off, because generally federal jobs have more worker security, as opposed to private companies, they just follow where the money goes. So you have more stable jobs, you have more federal benefits, and you have less safety violations. Our third contention is the idea of undermines OPEC hegemony. So let's talk about the problem with OPEC hegemony. It has caused two recessions, one between 74 and 75 and one between 79 and 81. So basically what they do is they artificially raise these oil prices, and as a result this creates a lot of volatility, this drops investor confidence, this creates a lot of chaos and investor panic inside the United States, which leads to stagflation. So while the prices go up, economic growth does not happen. So people, when stagflation happened, could not basically afford foods. Afford food and afford basic necessities. If you want to see a more recent example, basically whenever there's instability in the Middle East, whenever OPEC still artificially props up prices, so you see that oil prices are artificially suppressed highly, and as a result people are not able to have as much access to it. It cuts into their money that they can spend in other places like consumer spending. Now they have to spend it on this artificially propped up oil, and it creates a lot of investor stability because OPEC is located, once again, it's all these Middle Eastern countries which are having a lot of instability right now. So you have more stability, price stability, because it's domestic oil. You have the price of oil will actually go down because you don't have OPEC basically artificially propping up this price. So you have a better quality of life in the United States. You have more spending because they have to spend less on OPEC. So how the uniqueness of our plan is basically that private companies can easily once again, they follow where the money goes. They can export that oil. But once again, if we're looking at the federal government, it has an overwhelming, compelling state interest to keep that oil inside the United States. This means less reliance on OPEC. This means they have less power. They have less power to artificially prop up prices. They have less power whenever there's instability in the Middle East. It won't hurt, the unemployment rate in the United States. It won't hurt investor confidence in the United States. So you have a better, more stable economy, and you have more happy workers. So our fourth contention is basically the idea of funding. So we're going to look at how Pemex is run in Mexico. Once again, Mexico nationalized the fossil fuel industry, and as a result, basically, this has had a huge positive approval among the voters, and basically, instead of these profits going to corporate dividends, instead of these profits going to the pockets of corporate bonuses as far as these oil companies are.
So like when you nationalize these oil companies, will they still be working? Will the nationalized oil companies still do work?
Through normal means. So however else we nationalize companies. Obviously you can't completely nationalize in day and age, but as long as we can prove that the government takes a larger role in these companies, we still link to our benefits.
But the companies still continue to do work. As in they hire their workers, they pay them, they do economic activity and all that stuff.
There's going to be a significant more amount of regulation and oversight by in the federal government through normal means, like I said.
They might compete for contracts or something.
They might compete for contracts or something. Once again, we're looking at the model of Pemex. I need to continue this. Sorry. So once again, like we've seen in Mexico, instead of this money basically increasing the wealth inequality, because once again, the people that are getting rich in these oil companies are these executives, are these CEOs, and that's where a lot of the income is going. It's not necessarily trickling down as well. So this money directly goes to the pockets of the United States, because once again, it can use this for funding, for social welfare programs. It can use this for basically, and as a result, you're redistributing wealth, and you're decreasing the amount of wealth inequality. You raise the quality of life of all the people who benefit from social programs. This is better for the economy, because if you put money in the hands of people at the lower classes, this is the best for the economy. This is best for aggregate demand. Because people who are working on minimum wage, people at the bottom of the ladder who get these social benefits, they're going to spend their money right away. As soon as they get that paycheck, they're putting it right back in the economy, into the car industry, into the food industry, into housing. And it's preferable to have these people have the money so they spend it, as opposed to putting it in the pockets of the top 1% who run these privatized oil companies, who don't necessarily invest it back in the States. They can invest it overseas, they can hold on to it. So for all those reasons, vote affirmation.
Can I ask, can I have a roadmap?
Yeah, sure. It's just going to be one off and then their case in order.
Okay. Is it long?
It's pretty long, yeah. So,
take 5-6 pages there.
I mean, not 5, 6, but we have 4 parts, so if that gives you
Wait, am I gonna need another one?
It's taken us like a lot of paper, so you might need a lot. There's 4 parts specifically, so you might just want 4 pieces of paper. Yeah.
It's the first time I've used more than 2.
I tend to flow links and impacts on the same page.
Okay,
That's what I think it is.
Alright, want to start? Judges ready? Okay. Alright, let's start with the counter plan. A counter plan is to end all economic activity on federal land. This is going to be a mutually exclusive plan because the Affirmative plan continues economic action to the federal government. We're saying we eliminate all economic action. Solvency here is that once it collapses the economy, 86% of the American economy is currently on federal land. The stopping economic activity destroys all value to maintain the land. Money in banks is not guaranteed, which means there's going to be no federal backing here. 2, this destroys the dollar and creates hyperinflation. The dollar is going to be completely worthless. All investment within the United States and from the United States is going to be completely useless. And this means there's going to be future oil speculation, but the oil industry can't possibly invest in future markets because there is no dollar to invest with. 3, China and Japan are holding all the holdings that China and Japan have in the United States are completely worthless. Their economy is crashing. There's only 3 major economic powers right now: the United States, China, and Japan. No one can actually redeem the econ, which means there's ultimately going to be a global meltdown and all of them collapse. 4, this makes Obama look frankly insane and destroys all future speculation. No one's going to trust the future stability in the United States markets. Okay, second part, collapse of capitalism is inevitable and it's not fast enough to stop extinction in the status quo. 1, unfunded liabilities that are currently 40% of the GDP and the debt of the United States combined, which means there's going to be $60 trillion more in unfunded liabilities than there exists in the entire world circulation. This is going to be ultimately impossible to pay. Yeah?
So on one hand, you're advocating these disads to why nationalize is bad, but on the other hand, you want to remove all federal economy and you want to crash the U.S. economy.
Well, I mean, you haven't heard our responses on your case yet, so that's kind of putting words in our mouth, because right now we're just saying, right now, so far, all you know is that
Can you clarify your counterplan again?
The counterplan is to end all economic land on federal land.
All economic activity.
All economic activity on
on
federal
that same thing. That includes non-federal as well. That includes private.
That includes private.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Two, alternative energy is currently running out in the status quo. We don't have the capacity for efficient use, and there's no rare earth minerals left to sustain growth. It's only going to be 10 years of iridium left, which is the key to solar panels. We need iridium to build solar panels. Furthermore, neodymium's going down. That's the key to wind turbines. Neodymium's going down, which is the key to steel construction. So any real transportation, any real infrastructure can create. All the rare earth minerals we need to sustain those things are currently going down. Three, systemic unemployment right now in the status quo because of the Industrial Revolution and because of the technological revolution. The United States and American workers are continuously being replaced by computers, by industrialization, which means it's going to be a huge systemic unemployment problem, and we can't solve it because technology is going to keep going forward. And this is going to create a strain on resources. Unemployment. The unemployed don't contribute to society, but they do have to take all government benefits, and they also have to take resources, which means the opponents can't solve for that as well. Four, peak oil was hit 10 years ago. There's large fields that we can't access anymore. The Saudis have completely drained most of the large oil fields. They have to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they can't sustain the population growth because population growth is exponential. Saudis overestimated last year, according to WikiLeaks, their oil reserves by 45%. The entire world's coal reserves is overestimated by 99%, and there's no other viable alternative to actually achieve petroleum, and therefore we can't access plastics, we can't access transportation without energy. And oil is key because energy from oil is higher than any other kind of alternative energy you can talk about, including fracking. Five, the boom-bust cycle of capitalism is unsustainable. Like, the recessions get worse every single time. Like, every single 20 years, it's like kind of cycle where the economy gets really good and then it gets really bad. But the recessions inevitably always get worse, which means collapse is ultimately going to become inevitable. The war in here is international relations, the international connectivity of the markets, and like from the United States to the rest of the world makes recessions worse. Third part, collapse now is better than collapse later. One, space weapons. Now, the United States is currently violating international treaty by testing weapons like the rods of God and the vacuum bombs, and this violates space treaties with Russia and China specifically, which means space treaties with these countries are unsustainable. I've already taken 2 POIs and won't be taking any more. Which means space treaties with Russia and China are currently unsustainable, which means we're running out of resources to use space weapons, and this means that, and this also means that we need to use space weapons to go into the stratosphere to get like minerals from like the asteroids from other moons, etc. Two, there's unsustainable, like space weapons are unsustainable, like vacuum bombs and everything. They allow us to strike anywhere and destroy entire populations almost instantly. This makes them more deadly than nuclear weapons because nuclear weapons itself, the fear of mutually assured destruction, but space weapons strike instantly. 3, human growth is exponential. Right now there's going to be a huge water shortage and famine coming. Right now in North China, the reservoir is almost completely out. It's going to take 1 year, experts estimate, for the North China reservoir to completely depleted. Furthermore, the African famine continues to perpetuate itself, and this is ultimately going to lead to resource wars. Once North China runs out of water, that means there's going to be severe water shortages in the entire world. Also, look back to the oil market we talked about later. There's going to be resource wars between countries that are going to be fighting over, and inevitably countries with space weapons are going to be using those space weapons in order to attain resources for their own national security. Fourth part is that warming will destroy all ecosystems. Right now, warming is anthropogenic, and it's basically going to happen right now. And this is going to have 2 impacts of warming. The first impact of warming is show of a cascade. If even one species goes away, that's going to be a keystone species, which means all the species that rely on that species go away, which means all the species that rely on those species go away, and it's going to continue to perpetuate until this ultimate extinction and biodiversity goes down. Secondly, ocean salinization is only prevented because of the cool Earth atmosphere. The global warming directly contributes to ocean salinization, which means that directly the ecosystems inside the oceans are going to be severely hurt, which hurts the fish ecosystems, which hurts our ecosystems ultimately. 5, extinction will happen in 100 years because of global warming without the 20 to 60% reduction by 2020 in fossil fuel emissions that the UN keeps bringing up. 6, transition wars are peaceful. States lose legitimacy and they can't fight because they don't have the international credibility to sustain fights. That's why transition wars never work. 7, states can't pay soldiers so they don't fight since they no longer have any money because the US dollar is worthless. 8, collapse means individual focus on their own individual means they won't want to fight other people. People won't want to fight because they have to work on surviving first. 9, a lack of resources kills the ability to wage wars because we can't use tanks and planes without resources necessary for them to function. 10, this creates local decision making, which solves because it reshapes the morality of individuals within the community. Like, we don't have large nations governing anymore, we have local small villages to governing. 11, decreased accumulation of power means that they can't channel their resources towards war. 12, nuke wars don't cause extinction, only space weapons do. There's several warrants here. 1, fallout won't happen. There have been thousands of tests in Hiroshima, and fallout would have occurred by now, but it hasn't occurred yet. B, we lack the psychological ability to land all of our nukes, not because we're like inherently against killing other people, but because of mutually assured destruction. We're never going to launch a nuke knowing we're going to die at the same time. C, rain stops nuclear winter. There's always this argument about nuclear winter, but rain's always going to inevitably stop that. Impacts. 1, there is no value of licensing the agricultural revolution because since then we moved away from nature and we stopped engaging with nature. Technological growth has grown astronomically since the agricultural revolution, which has led us to stop engaging with nature and instead to engage with robots and stuff. 2, technological growth leads to what Heidegger refers to as the standing reserve, according to Bestand. And our mindset has changed to be focused on growth, which has led to people in nature to be viewed as tools for growth. 4, this worldview ultimately collapses to dehumanization as we misconceive ourselves as beings, because now we think, oh, we're only tools for economic growth and we're not individual human beings with real autonomy. 5, we collapse everything, which means people return to the primitive world as they are viewed as functional. No more questions, I already took 2, sorry. 6, this means that we move back to primatization because we destroy technological growth in the standing reserve. 7, this prevents dehumanization, which is the root cause of all violence. Let's move on to their case now. Their first contention is about fracking. They talk about the fact that private companies are incentivized by profit. We solve this better because we reduce all fracking costs. Like, even if the federal government completely took over fracking, what happens if there's still going to be a little bit of runoff? We completely stop it because there's no more economic growth. 2, job quality. Like, the federal government wants to keep workers happy, and they talk about but then again, this bites directly into us. Their like glorification of like jobs and stuff is actually a perpetuation of our Heidegger critique. 3, they talk about OPEC hegemony. They talk about how the fact there's been oil shocks in 74 to 75 and 79 to 81. Right now, the geopolitics have fundamentally changed. Canada, Venezuela, and Mexico are the biggest contributors to the United States. Not that. Furthermore, we completely destroy OPEC hegemony because OPEC no longer has any oil to use hegemony off of. They talk about the fact that private companies export oils, like all the impacts they have about oil, we do better. 4, they talk about funding. They talk about the fact this worked in Mexico. U.S. is completely different from Mexico because U.S. processes oil, it doesn't produce oil. Furthermore, they talk about wealth redistribution. We completely eliminate wealth inequality. Therefore, I ask for a vote in the negation.
I'll give you more.
Okay, just give me a second before we start.
What do you expect? Roadmap?
Framework.
Framework?
Framework.
Like, are you adding one? Okay.
We need a new framework off.
Oh, wait, is this going to be a new page?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna put it on the new page.
I'm just going to miss that.
So what's the rest of your roadmap?
Oh, then it's going to be the one off case, which is like the Heidegger CP.
Yeah, like,
Where in the CP?
I'm just going to go straight down the
Yeah.
flow, like line by line.
I just slowed it down, so.
Yeah, I kind of got lost in where like the impacts and links ended and started. And then it'll be back onto the case. Everyone ready? First off, our interpretation for framework for this debate is that we as the AF get to interpret which way the framework goes. This is best for debate because one, AF flexibility, when we start off the AF, we have a way in which we have to choose how we're going to evaluate the round, and so long as we're choosing that we need to evaluate through a policy option, which this really was a policy option, and we need to be able to evaluate competing policy interpretations. Then, 2, the context is being able to understand the context of the, within this debate, being able to understand that this is a policy action, that we shouldn't necessarily be taking non-institutional approaches to fiat is really abusive and makes it really hard to understand the way in which debate functions. And 3 is flexibility, is that we need to be able to is our framework stability, is that we need to be able to have a stable framework because depending on which way in which you present your AF, then like it's like if someone from the NAACP were potentially proposing their action at a KKK rally all of a sudden, then like it would be taken out of context than like if you were doing it at like a civil rights movement rally. These are two completely different things, so we need to be able to at least have some form of stability, and that stability is best on the idea of net benefits. Also, challenging the framework within this debate is really bad because 1, the role of ballot isn't to decide any idea of being or ontology. Ontology shouldn't come first at all. In fact, the ballot should be who debates the best, and then furthermore, the role of the judges is to choose who affirms or negates the resolution the best in terms of policy action. And then 3rd, this is the wrong form. If you want to be talking about things like the real problems of capitalism, you're not going to be able to solve that within like the fiat mindset of debate. You have to be able to take it to like another place. You have to be able to understand the problems from outside, from external to the round. 4, switch sides is good. It's best to just be able to like read this like on another like read it like as the AF or whatever if you really want to do that. And 5, this is a test ground for like ideas. We need to be able to understand like the way in which our policy actions function. Yeah.
Can you clarify specifically the way the negation like violates your framework?
Yeah, non-institutional fiat is going to be the link here. You have to have a competitive policy option. We can't just have a policy like end all economics. On the counterpoint, first off, this is a version of non-institutional fiat. This is the exact way in which K-teams cheat like they're doing right now. All they're able to say is that everyone will all of a sudden end all their economic relations on federal land. But guess what? Just so long as one person decides not to do that, then that means that we've proven abuse within this round. This abuse is enough to pull the trigger against the negative right now and not vote for the counterpoint at all. It leaves only the risk of the affirmative. That means you weigh the entirety of the affirmative against all their framework. Don't let them bring up ontology. Yeah.
How's this abusive?
This is abusive because non-institutional fiat means that you're taking like not even corporations, but like just generic people. Like all of a sudden you're saying like I'm not allowed to have any more economic activity. Like you can't stop me so long as I'm going to go buy something, and like the vending machine outside means that like I've literally just destroyed the entire solvency of your counterplan. So like I actually am going to do that. So if you want to write that down, it's like solvency deficit. then
we
go
can
for
read
it. Yeah. So then next they say that this is the best way to destroy the dollar. It causes hyperinflation and allows places like Japan and China to come in and start competing with these with the U.S. dollar. But first off, none of this actually is warranted. Like, we have no idea in which in a scenario in which like all economic activity were to stop. In fact, most people wouldn't realize it right away, but then we start to realize it would become a thing. Then eventually people would just start spending money again. And chances are, with a globalized system, that you wouldn't just necessarily stop all federal economic activity because they can't even specify the way in which their plan works. They refuse to start taking questions like, are companies that like are acting in other countries, do they all of a sudden get access to other countries, not just in the U.S.? Is it everywhere? Furthermore, inflation is below target inflation, which more would only help. But like again, we're not advocating that all like the counterplan is any good. And furthermore, they say that collapse is inevitable. Well, first off, here's one thing: is a try or die. The only way in which you can fund things like space programs is through good economic times. And furthermore, the subpoint A here is that there's going to be an asteroid that hits the Earth at some point, or super volcanoes are going to cause extinction, or the environment is naturally going to degrade. We've seen extinction cycles before; they'll happen again, and they're going to happen. They're going to happen at some point. And getting off the rock is the only way in which we can do that. And in times of good economics, is the only time we can get off the rock. This means that we are going to die inevitably, and the only way in which we can ever get off the rock is to get over all of this. Furthermore, if you look at the overall thesis of Heidegger, this idea of having this Dasein or being, it would only be inclusive within the context of not worrying about the way in which nature is functioning, the way in which they actually say like, oh, all these things are going to be destroyed. They're actually breaking down our relationship with the environment around us, which links back into Heidegger. Heidegger would say that's actually what causes the ontologic damnation, and that's actually what kills your being. The fact that you're flowing with your pen right now means that if your pen runs out of ink, you're going to have to start thinking about, why did this break down? Why did it stop working? Then you have to constantly start questioning your relationship with it, and that's what causes ontologic damnation. Just the fact that you're flowing literally destroys all the uniqueness for all of this, which they have to win. The counterplan can't necessarily resolve.
Can you just explain this once more?
So you're reading Heidegger, so I would hope you kind of know this, but Heidegger basically says that the way in which we resolve our being with other things is that we become complicit with it, that we stop worrying, we constantly, that we instead of constantly struggling against nature and the way in which we interact with the world, that we instead just accept the state of being. This is how humans began to function. This is the way in which we have actually evolved into a more technocratic society, and so to that extent, the way in which you're constantly breaking down all these ways in which we're going to die, we start worrying about the way in which our mentality, the way in which we're going to live, and whether or not we're going to be able to constantly survive or be complicit with the status quo, which means that that you're essentially just biting back into Heidegger, like you're literally causing ontologic damnation by like bringing up all these problems. Then they say all this stuff about like no nuclear war. Like, we don't have to win a nuclear war scenario. All we have to do is win that like we make the economy better, and like the economy is key to like NASA or something. Like, you don't solve for any of that. Furthermore, you provide no warrant for space weapons. Furthermore, space weapons would be applied to the same mutually assured destruction, because any country that has space weapons, if they fired their space weapon, the other country would fire their space weapon, mutually assured destruction happens again. Yeah, so let's see. So then, yeah, we don't have to win nuclear wars. Like, transition wars would be inevitable. Like, literally, there would be a lot of people that really don't like the plan, and they can't, like, to the extent that they can try to fiat that every individual person, like you and I, are the ones that are going to be doing this, and that means that it's going to be really bad. And these are all reasons why we need fracking in the U.S. is because, this capitalist system is like going to be inevitable anyways. The best way to get off the rock, at that point, you could start a system of like no economies if you really wanted. Furthermore, this is a mix of Heidegger and DDEV. DDEV actually indicates that you would have economies that just be at lower, more functional levels, means that you still have economic, like the way in which you talk about these transition communities would still happen in the U.S. And yeah, that basically takes out all of Heidegger. You know, and he was a Nazi. Neither knew nor that. Oh, and he was extremely anthropocentric. Doesn't actually care about other animals, just cares about like the nature of things. So finally going to the AF. To the extent that we're winning, that their Heidegger doesn't link to this at all, that means that we are winning this debate functionally. They have conceded everything because we've answered this. They just talk about how all these things are links to Heidegger and how their collapse of the entire economy is what resolves this. So first off, extend the fact that private businesses actually destroy fracking more than anything. That this is the best way that they want to make profits. They ignore externalities. They destroy the environment. The best way to solve this problem is through having the United States federal government do it. Furthermore, private companies hate regulations. They have really bad. They don't care about regulations at all. Then the federal government would actually help make things better, make things more stable. Furthermore, we undermine OPEC hegemony, and that means that and they remove fracking, so they don't get any fracking.
Roadmap.
So I'll be going over their framework. Then after that, I'll go on to our counterplan, and then the DDEV contention, and then after that, I'll go on to their case. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. So
please,
begin.
Please signpost where you are in
Yeah.
the long ass.
Yeah, sure. So let's go on to their framework first. So they decided to say that the affirmative gets basically the interpretation. They said that it's a key to like affirmative flexibility. We can see that this actually validates the negative because basically excludes them for every single round where they want to bring up their own framework. The reason why this is going to be really important is because when you exclude the negative and you don't allow them to bring up their own framework, that means that we never engage with each other. The reason why you have to engage with each other through having a negative option to change the framework is that way we can have like debates over which framework would be better, allowing the negative to decide or the affirmative, so we can provide our own like competitive like options and what to do. Then also to the fact that they said we have to evaluate this through a policy debate. However, that's what we were doing. We just have a counterplan to a policy debate framework, but then we just have critical impacts attached to it. We were not running a critique. Then let's look to the next fact that like understanding context is key. Like okay, fine, but like basically what you have to do is like rather than just focusing on like, the policy option, you have to evaluate critical impacts as well, because otherwise basically you exclude the other, and that is going to lead to like main ontological damnation that we're talking about here. And then also by excluding the other, that leads to genocide against the other, because we'll view it as like the problem that we have to like eliminate. And then when that happens, when we try to eliminate and we fail, we find more problems, and then that leads to basically what's going to like end up in like extinction, because we end up like finding ourselves as a problem and we commit suicide. Then let's look down to their framework regarding like framework stability being important. They decided to bring up the NCAAP proposing like their like civil rights plan to the KKK rally versus at a civil rights meeting. Like how does it make any sense? Like they don't tell you why this is actually going to be important. And also like even if this contradiction does exist, this actually keeps bringing down Stalinistic monothought. So you'd be referring us here because we're like making this like so that like there's going to be like so basically we make the people so that they have to like change their entire worldview as a result of like this like whole like cognitive dissonance that will occur. So therefore we should be referring us there. Then they decided to say basically this is the wrong form for this, that we should be taking this to another place, have this exclusionary in and of itself by saying that we don't belong here, that we should take our like ideas to another place and that we're not allowed to bring it up here at all. That's exclusionary, that's bad for debate, that's just bad in general. Now let's move on to their non-institutional policy thing. However, we are using institutional policy making. We're saying the United States federal government like basically ends all activity on federal land, which means that like if any like the corporate actor or any private actor is like taking activity on federal land, that ends. And the United States is doing any activity on federal land, that ends. So basically, we can see that this isn't institutional actors like taking action. We just think it's so the United States federal government prevents like any like other private actor from doing it, like so long as it exists. Because at that point, like federal land basically is gone. Now, basically, let's move on to our case now. They said that basically people wouldn't realize the fact that we just collapsed the economy. I'm pretty sure that people would realize that the United States said we're ending all activity on like federal land, and also we're banning you from like taking part in federal activity in federal land as well. This is clear that people will realize that this is actually happening. Then they decided to say that people start spending again. However, when the economy is dead, like in its current form, like capitalism is dead, people will not start spending again. Maybe there'll be like little things like the little like markets, local markets. However, it's not going to be like the capitalist system that we're talking about here that causes a problem. Then they decided to say that inflation is low right now. However, at the point where the United States dollar loses all its value, you can see that inflation will happen. This is more unique. This is support our side. So the only thing that can happen is that inflation goes up. Next, they decided to talk about the try or die scenario. That basically we can only fund space during good times, and this allows us to get off the rock. However, short circuit, we do this, we die now. When the space research happens, we can see this actually leads to space weapons. Right now, DARPA is funding like space research because the economy is doing so well right now, which means that as a result of the space weapons will lead to the extinction of mankind because the damage is done so quickly that there's no chance of response, which means mad theory does not apply here. Yeah.
Whose plan is actually creating this inflation, and are you advocating for inflation or against inflation?
We're advocating for inflation. The kind of plan causes it. Okay, cool. So then, so that means that we actually die before we can ever get off the rock because we die immediately as a result of space weapons. Nobody like cares like they fire space weapons because they know they can fire without any harm done to them. Then they decided to say basically we break down like relationship with nature and we have to like think why things break down. However, we actually accept the nature and we actually actually support nature and accept relationship with nature by going back to primitivism. That's one of the impacts we decided to bring up during our the impacts of the counterplan, one of the critical impacts. So therefore, we can see we actually go back to nature, we don't actually get rid of it. And we also talk about how Obama looks insane, destroys future speculation, and basically no one has any belief in United States economy or globalized economy. So therefore, could extend that across the focus, and my opponents pretty much co-conceded that. So now let's move on to the classical capitalism is inevitable. So they can see the fact that unfunded liabilities are currently 400% of GDP plus debt. They can see the fact that $60 trillion more than the rest of world GDP is impossible to pay. They can see that means like the collapse of capitalism is going to be inevitable when they can see it. They also can see the fact that alternative energy is running out. So therefore, we can see the collapse of capitalism is inevitable in that regard because we have no energy that will be able to sustain us. And they also can see the fact that systemic unemployment will occur. So therefore, we can see that cap is going to fail. Now, the only response to this really is that cap is inevitable. At the point where we show you the collapse of the capitalism is going to be inevitable, and they have no real warrants on their side, you'll be evaluating us here. Then they decide to say that we just have to prove the economy is good. However, we're telling you the collapse of the economy is good right now. So we wouldn't be willing to be and also when they say that economy is good, they have no nationalized impact there, so we won't be evaluating it. Then they said that we have no warrant for space weapons whatsoever. However, we can see that there actually is a warrant because DARPA is researching right now. The only way to end the research for these space weapons is to collapse the economy right now. As they said themselves, space weapons can only happen during good economic times. They can see that the economy is relatively good compared to our plan right now, so you should be preferring us there. They said that we need fracking for capitalism. However, we're destroying fracking, so therefore we destroy capitalism. We can see that. That's cool. They decided to say that DITA still has economy, but it's not a capitalist economy like we have right now. It'll be more like a local kind of thing, where we don't have this massive capitalistic system and like banking system we're talking about right now. Then they decided to go onto the claim that Heidegger was a Nazi and that he supported anthropocentrism. However, don't reject a good argument just because the activists are advocating for it is bad. No thank you this time. I'm really low on time. They can see the collapse now is better than collapse later. They can see space weapons would occur. If we ever got space weapons, they just said that we won't ever get space weapons and nobody would use it. However, MAD fails because space weapons happen really quickly, whereas people have a chance to mount a second strike as soon as we use nuclear weapons. So therefore, we can see that the hand of God is actually more powerful. My opponents can see the hand of God is insanely more powerful than nuclear weapons. So that doesn't so we will be winning there. You can see the fact that human growth is also exponential right now, and the water shortage and famine is coming. So even if they take out this extinction scenario, they don't respond to water or famine. So therefore, we win there. And let's move on to the next impact. We decided to talk about how warming will destroy all ecosystems. They can see that extinction happens in 100 years, and they also can see the fact that transition water peaceful, so we'll be extending that across the flow. Next, let's move on to the next impacts we decided to talk. Internal links we decided to talk about. So then we also decided to talk about how states can't pay soldiers so they don't fight. This kills the ability to wage war. That means we save millions, if not billions, of lives. You can see the fact that collapsing the individual focus on own individual means, which takes out their large globalized capitalism point. They conceded that. They also conceded the fact that lack of resources kills the ability to wage war. So that means no war happens. And they also conceded the fact that basically nuke wars don't lead to extinction. So whatever. So now let's move on to the impacts. They decided to say that basically. And we wouldn't have access to this thing. We actually contradict ourselves with Heidegger. However, we don't because we actually go back to the nature point. We don't actually go act against nature as my opponents try to claim we do. We actually basically make sure that we go back to primitivism, whereas they say that we reject primitivism and try to stop death. However, Heidegger has never said that we should try to stop death and we should try to stop suffering. All he says is that we should go back to nature and we should get rid of this massive technological growth, and that's what we do. We get rid of the bestand. Next, we also talk about how this worldview equals dehumanization as we misconceive our becoming, and that basically we collapse everything, which means people return to the primitive worldview as they viewed it as functional back in the day. This move back to primitivism destroys technological growth and standing reserves, and also prevents dehumanization. For these reasons, I strongly urge about mitigation. Thank you.
Alright, everybody ready? I doubt I'll need a roadmap, it's just going to be voting issues. Okay. The first voting issue is going to be framework. Prefer our interpretation of the framework because we prevent exclusion. We specifically call my opponents excluding because they say, all these really good ideas you have, that, sure, they might be good, but don't have them within this debate round. The argument we're making here is that we're able to make these arguments specifically within the unique atmosphere of this debate round, therefore prefer our framework. Furthermore, understand that they completely misinterpret the way we construct Heidegger. It's not a critique of their language, it's not a critique of their fundamental representations. It's a critique of the ideas that their plan is going to create in the actual debate world. We're just criticizing, it's just a critical disadvantage. We're not talking about the effects in the real world at all. Ignore that completely. Furthermore, we're not completely condemning capitalism. The entire argument we have here isn't it's a condemnation of state-run capitalism, but capitalism is inherently always going to be the default system that small societies default to, because there's going to be significantly less regulation in small societies, small villages, as opposed to the other big places. So it's not a complete condemnation of capitalism. Don't let them access those arguments either. Furthermore, on the topic of Heidegger, remember that this isn't a complete remember all the arguments against us on Heidegger are basically putting words in our mouths. We specifically cite certain citations from Heidegger, but the ultimate argument here is that we don't want the state to ultimately view people as ways to achieve economic growth. That's not what people are for. We simply take that one idea. It's not like this isn't a complete support of Heidegger, and furthermore, it's not a Heidegger criticism. So therefore, don't believe most of the terms, because all we're saying is that fundamentally not going with the counterplan that we propose is going to lead to people being viewed as tools for economic growth. That's dehumanizing. That's the root cause of all war. Second voting issue is going to be about solvency. Now they concede most of our solvency. The only thing they say here is that we don't really cause inflation, and since we don't really cause inflation, none of the other solvency actually happens. But this is fundamentally untrue for a couple of reasons. First of all, remember that the very first part of our solvency is that completely stopping economic growth on economic activity on federal land completely destroys the United States economy and its ability to interact, right? So there's two separate solvency points here. One is the ability of the United States to actually interact economically because they no longer have economic growth. The second one is inflation, right? So they keep challenging inflation, but they do completely concede that we do have access to one solvency. Furthermore, we do say that Obama looks completely insane after he does this plan, which means no one ever invests in the United States markets anymore, which means effectively the United States economy is completely collapsed. They drop all this solvency, don't really evaluate the other inflation because they don't have any real offense on that, it's just defense, so they let our solvency extend all the way through. Furthermore, our third voting issue is going to be mostly about impact talk and the links and concerning in this debate. So on our side, we basically talk about space weapons, and we talk about space weapons are infinitely more deadly than any nuclear weapon impacts they bring up. They don't really bring up nuclear weapon impacts, so that's not really important, but we are also the only ones in this debate actually stopping significant war. We say that like their entire advocacy is that we need to get off the rock, but getting off the rock inherently creates support for like space technology. They would want to continue to invest into space technology. We're saying the emphasis in space technology, exactly the reason we're having space weapons in the first place, that's a short circuit because we can't get off the rock once everybody's dead because of space weapons. So don't vote for the. So it's better to die 100 years later because whatever meteor, whatever super volcano happens, because that's their estimated time frame. The time frame here is very, very long length of time. We're saying don't let the space war happen because the space war happen is going to be inevitable because of the resource shortage that's going to be happening in China within the next year. We talk about the water reservoir, we talk about resource wars there, we talk about oil collapsing not only in the United States but also in the Middle East and Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, etc. All of those things are going to lead to resource wars, and since space weapons are already being developed because of the prioritization of space technology, that's what's going to lead to space wars. This is going to be the single most important impact in today's entire debate because space weapons completely eliminate whole swaths of human populations, and there is not the single and there isn't the entire check and balance of mutually assured destruction because again it goes conceded by my opponent. Space weapons are completely instant. Furthermore, they drop global warming. Like the entire global warming argument we have is that we need to reduce emissions by 20 to 60% by 2020, and we're the only ones in this round that reduce it even more than 60%, like possibly not 90%, because we completely halt fossil fuel emissions. And the affirmative again bites into this because they say that we still need to continue the natural gas, we still need to continue fossil fuel production, which means again they continue to perpetuate global warming. They continue to contribute to global warming. Global warming is also going to lead to extinction. Remember that we have that extinction scenario on our side as well. Then the third impact we're talking about here is Heidegger. But remember, this isn't a complete support of all of Heidegger's rhetoric. First of all, don't let them bring up the reject the Arthur arguments because we're simply taking one idea from Heidegger where he says that we don't want people to be used as tools for economic growth. That's not the fundamental goal of the negation. Sorry. So voting for the CP means a world where the people are going to be viewed not as tools for economic growth, but as simple human beings. And this also takes away the state-run capitalism that dehumanizes them. And we talk about all these otherizing impacts my opponents don't really talk about. And we're saying here that viewing people as tools for economic growth justifies the sacrifice of them, justifies any atrocities you can commit against them. Therefore, vote for us because we prevent dehum, we prevent global warming, we prevent space war. On all their side, all they really talk about is the fracking point. But fracking has significantly less magnitude than all of our arguments. Evaluate magnitude first because 1% of infinity is still going to be infinity. And furthermore, 1% of infinity is still going to be infinity. And therefore, like as debaters, we need to evaluate the largest magnitude impacts first before we talk about the very small impacts about fracking. Therefore, I should a firm vote in the negative. Thank you.
Alright, so starting ready? Yeah. Sweet. Alright. Cool. So I'm just going to go straight into voting issues. And the idea is, first of all, we want to talk about framework. You're going to prefer our framework of a competitive policy option because you can't evaluate non-institutional fiat. We're not excluding their ideas, and this is a new point that they brought up in their neg block, so I can basically briefly address this using the Prime Minister's thing. We're not excluding their basically ideas, we're just saying that this is not the best medium to do it. Like my partner was basically saying that you can't actually prevent people from going out and spending this. This fiat is completely oppressive, and this fiat doesn't actually work on a real-world scale. Even if it's good ideas, as long as we can prove that it works in a better setting besides in this debate, it's not the role of the ballot to decide to pass these theoretical non-institutional fiats. It's definitely better for education to look at things from a policy standpoint. No, I'm not going to answer the question.
Also, the role of the ballot is to just decide which team to debate best, not outside. It has to be fiated impacts.
Right. So it's just the role of the ballot once again is just to evaluate debate arguments that's best for education. What they're doing with this non-institutional fiat is basically a form of cheating, which is really bad for education. On the topic of NASA, only good economies allow us to get off the rock. They drop our arguments about asteroids, supervolcanoes, and various other existential crises that shift to a DDEV that will never solve. They don't actually solve for any of these issues. NASA is
Try or die for the F.
Try or die for the F. All right, NASA is short term, thus getting off the rock is the only way to live at all. They have a flaw in their counterplan. It says all economic stops, which means either durable fiat takes out transition. Basically, these economies they're talking about, turning the counterplan, their counterplan is co-opted. Once again, we're talking about this counterplan is basically this fiat, the fiat that they're using.
Order, they never brought up this whole that counterplan be co-opted argument or whatever.
Or durable fiat or any
Yeah.
of this new stuff.
Yeah, the whole entire idea that like you said that it was like everybody would stop economics, then you like change your counterplan in the neg block. I think like this is legitimate.
Okay, wait. What are you saying is new?
We're saying like all their attacks on like our kind
durable fiat and
I know, and I was also making this argument. I said like you literally still have economies.
It's under consideration.
All right. Anyway, back to how their non-institutional fiat is just terrible. It's a terrible framework. Framework is an a priori issue, and we should look at it before evaluating the arguments. If one person doesn't comply with the counterplan, it means there's a solvency deficit. They fail to win this mindset shift. That means you vote half. Really, this is just terrible for education. Because this is a completely unrealistic counterplan that you can't really enforce and has no level of enforcement. And this kind of education should not be discussed in the role of the ballot to see who does the best debate, not who can do the most political, social change inside
So
around.
long as people are still capitalist, they don't solve anything.
So long as people are still capitalists, they don't actually solve anything because all they're doing is just shutting down the economic activity on federal land. Anyway, Heidegger actually says the way in which we engage our beings, such as worrying about capitalism and extinction, destroys our ontology, which is turning their counterplan that they link into Heidegger. And then non-institutional fiat is, once again, it's the a priori voting issue. It's the most important thing they drop about this. We talk about this in my partner's speech. It's a reason to reject their off case for probability. And in a little bit, I'm going to be talking about why we still win on our policy and it still outweighs their non-institutional fiat. And they have to defend Heidegger when we prove you cause your impacts and infinite. And let's talk a little bit about how they ended at their speech and do a little bit two worlds analysis now. They spent all this time on this institutional fiat, but they didn't really structurally address a lot of our arguments. We talked about how funding is important because we'll be able to get these tangible benefits. So show social benefits, and as a result, we're going to be redistributing wealth. They're not necessarily creating better wealth because they still link into all these problems that come with their non-institutional fiat. I can take the question. Alright, so continue on their idea. So ultimately you are going to prefer probability. And you're not going to prefer this BS pretty much argument that 1% of infinity, 1% of infinity magnitude is still infinity. Because mathematically that doesn't even work out if you use L'Hopital's rule. So once again, we have to look at the role of the ballot inside, at least in a debate round. You want to look at who has the most real world impacts. They haven't struck...
Also, saying that any percent of infinity outweighs means that you justify like genocides that
yeah,
are
absolutely,
much more probable.
Right. You basically say you can do anything as long as there's a tiny probability, like we can't go explore into space because we might trip over an asteroid. Anyway, they didn't structurally respond to our points about first, which is the idea of the job quality of people in these fracking industries. As long as in the world of the affirmation there's a choice between this private and this federal, we're preferring the federal because that's the most, because once again you have more worker safety regulations, you have more job security, and then you also have this other argument about funding. We talk about how this redistributes wealth, and once again, you're going to prefer our plan because we actually have probability, we actually have magnitude, we actually have solvency in the real world. We have basically realism where they have 1% of just the probability is probably less than 1%, and we actually solve for real world benefits. We actually stay true to the role of debate in the ballot. So they concede space weapons don't exist. A DARPA project is an infinitely deadly space weapon. I mean, they didn't really give any evidence in their arguments about how these space.
Whoa. Point of order. We don't concede that space weapons don't exist. That's like the.
You literally said that DARPA's just researching it.
And DARPA's doing it now.
Yeah, but we.
Okay, stop. New argument. What's new?
The new argument is that we conceded space weapons don't exist.
What do you have to say about this?
What do I have to say about this? Well, this is something that largely talked about in the neg block. We didn't get a chance to address.
All right, it's under consideration by both of us.
Sure. So, anyway, continuing about the space weapons, like, this is coming to a factual evidence. This is why you shouldn't really incorporate these non-institutional fiat and these policy things, because we can't actually look at evidence in a parliament. If you guys want to quickly Google, like, does this DARPA thing, is it realistic? It's not realistic. These space weapons just don't exist. So for all those reasons, we went on Heidegger. We went on these realistic probabilities of these actual benefits coming to people, and we talked about how their framework is non-institutional and abusive.
All right.